Hey guys, making a video of the 700. I'm gonna take it all apart. Gonna use the Insta360 to do a time lapse, and then I'm gonna take you guys through all the things I had to make, modify, and buy to make the 700 swap work. So let me get this apart and then we'll talk about it. And we're back. It took about 10 minutes to get this thing torn down. Just want to start out by saying I'm going to do these videos in a few different parts because it's just too hard to fit it all into one. Everything that I want to get sort of in depth with, the videos doing it all in one is just too long. So I'm going to try to touch on a couple things and then move on to a different part, and we'll see how that works. So in order to get any sort of swap going, you need a starting point. So for me, it started as a 23 Honda Grom, and the engine that I swapped into this one is out of a 22 Yamaha R7, a 700cc CP2. So with the engine, and if you're gonna try to do like get an engine out of a wrecked bike, I would try to get everything with the engine. The wiring harness, the sensors, throttle bodies, all the wiring, all the ECU dash, hand controls, everything. On this, I even used the headlight and the headlight wiring harness. So I took everything I could. So that was the first two steps: get the bike, get the engine. And then one of the only parts that you really need to get to make this swap work and get going is the rear hub spacer, if you choose to go with one. So on this one and on my 500, I chose to go with a Paul La Vista Racing hub spacer and a Chimera hub. The Chimera hub is the same dimensions as the stock Grom hub. It's just a all aluminum piece. And I went with the spacer because the parallel twin is obviously quite a bit wider than the factory 125 engine. So spacing the rear sprocket out an inch gives you a way to actually center the engine up in the actual frame. So along with that, you're gonna have to figure out what sprocket size you wanna go with. For this being a 700, I decided to go with the 520. Steady Garage sells everything from a 420, 428, and I believe 520 is the highest they go. So I stuck with a 520, got my hub spaced out. That was the very first thing I did on the actual bike. Once you have the hub figured out, like that's where you're gonna put it, then you can start figuring out what you want to do with getting the actual engine lined up and figure out what parts of the frame you're gonna modify and how you're gonna make your frame rails. So looking at the bike, basically right where you're sitting is how I determined how to run my frame rails at the top. And I did this by first putting the engine on a dolly in front of the bike, or in front of the frame, and looking at the side profile just like you're sitting now. And I would take the gas tank, put it up there. I would take the bodywork, put it up there. I would test fit this with the bodywork on, see where I lined up, trim it, pull it off, put it back on. I test fit everything with the stock bodywork on the bike. And then when I got ready to actually mount up my double frame rails, I tacked them in with the bodywork all sitting on the bike, so I knew it was good. And then I ran a couple welds, took the bodywork off, and then actually fully welded and got full penetration on the tubes. A little step that I did as well, you don't have to do this, but I thought it was a little bit safer than just going to the stock Grom frame. And it is kind of hard to see, but I welded in my own 1/8" plate, kind of like a little triangle at the front, welded the 1/8" plate there for my actual frame rails to weld to. And then in the back on the sides of the frame in the rear, I actually ground all that down, every bit of the frame that's left, and I welded 1/8" plate to the actual frame, braced it, welded it, capped the back, I capped the inside, I tied the swing arm mount on the inside to the rear sets or the foot peg mounts. Basically strengthened everything that was left there, because in order to get the engine as far back and the height where you want, you basically have to trim a ton. I wouldn't say a ton, but a decent amount out of the factory frame. And there's only about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of frame left. So in order to make sure it was strong enough, I decided to weld my own 1/8" plate. You don't have to, but the peace of mind is there knowing that the frame is actually double the thickness that it started with. So that's the frame modifications. As far as getting the frame rails in and how I mounted them by test fitting the bodywork back and forth, back and forth. And then the next bit is the actual engine mounts. So this utilizes both factory mounts that the R7 uses. If I can move this out of the way. So there's a factory mount there, and then there's a factory mount at the bottom. Those are the two factory mounts, and all I did is, you can probably see it easiest on this one, is I made my own little boxed mounts. So that's 1/8" just steel plate that I cut down, made a box, welded, and then welded it all up. And then it's just an 1/8" steel that goes to the actual bolt mount on the engine. So did that on the front, on the two stock engine mounts. And I did the boxed in. It's more boxed in on this side than on the other side, because the engine is actually offset just a hair, or well, it's about 1 inch offset to get the chain to line up. So this side is offset. The other side is pretty much flush. It's just 1/8" steel welded to the side and then a bolt going through it, and that's how the engine's held. I did add another engine mount, because this is actually where the shock bolts up on the R7 and MT-07. So all I did was make a knuckle that was kind of like the stock shock Heim joint, if you would. And I made that one out of steel, welded it, braced it to the frame, and I added that as a mount as well. So those are the rear mounts. Got 3 rear mounts. Then on the front, I bent up my own tubing to go from the neck support down to the front head of the engine. So all it is the same 1 inch tubing, 1/8 wall thick, and then it's welded to some boxed in angle iron with a bolt. And then I did my brace on both sides as well. And honestly, I was going to add some more bracing, because I didn't utilize, there's a mount at the back of the head. I didn't utilize that, and I seriously thought I was going to take this apart at some point and brace it all, but the way it's been thus far, I think it's more than strong enough. I may do that if I upgrade the power on this with a different setup, but as far as all the test riding and how hard we kind of ran it so far, I'm super confident with this frame that it'll be able to take it. And really, it's the engine does support the frame. It's not a frame that's an engine's hanging out of. It is the engine that the frame is it kind of provides a skeleton around it. So it's not like the frame has to be super strong, because I shouldn't say it has to be super strong, but it doesn't have to be super complex, because we're using the engine as one of the mounts, if that makes any sense. So that's the frame and everything, how I got my double frame rails to work out, my front mounts and the rear. The sprocket in the back, big deal. I suppose I can go over to the height of the engine. So with getting the engine as far back as you can, and to get it lined up left and right with the rear sprocket, you also want to take into consideration the front sprocket on the actual engine. I still have my cover on, but I can try to explain it. But I believe the rule of thumb on bikes is that you want your front sprocket to be pretty much in line with your swing arm, and at, or if not above, the front swing arm mount. So on mine, initially I was running a 2.5 inch drop link in the back, and this chain was not rubbing on it's only rubbing now because it's a little loose, but my sprocket was actually right in line with the swing arm and the front mount. Now that I've kept the bike raised up, took out the 2.5 inch lowering link, I'm just a hair below, if not parallel with the swing arm mount. Now when you're sitting on it, this is not touching or anything, it's fine. It's just when the suspension is unloaded, it just kind of rests on the swing arm. So that came into play when I was trying to figure out how high or low, or how high it could come with the engine. So the main things other than the sprocket was getting the engine back and up, checking the chain alignment left to right, and then the front sprocket to the swing arm mount. And I think that's pretty much all I want to go over on the frame. Obviously, I needed to bend this, the tubing, and weld it. So if you have someone that can weld for you, or if you have your own welding machine, I MIG welded this with gas and wire. You could TIG weld it, that'd be the best way. I have someone that I've been talking about swaps with them, and they actually flux core welded theirs. I don't know if I'd go with that, but if you feel comfortable enough to ride it, when you get done, go for it. So there's the frame rails, and then the engine mounts, rear sprocket. I think that's good enough for right now. Guys, look out for the next couple videos. I've got a little list that I'm gonna kind of check off and go through. I appreciate the support. Hope you guys are doing well.